This is the village of Nether Poppleton, just outside York. As you can see, most of the houses are modern, some are Victorian, a few are 18th or at a push 17th century. But from up here, it looks very different. Even I can recognise a traditional medieval village layout, with the main street running up to the church and lots of little plots running off it. And those earthworks to the side of the church are an officially registered medieval site. But the locals think it's older. They think they can trace the roots of their village back to the Normans or even the Saxons. Are they right? We've got just 3 days to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you know what you're supposed to do next? About a third of them. Well done, Mick. We want you all to get back to your homes with your pet archaeologist in your hand and start digging, all right? Off you go! As they all set off, there's a great sense of community spirit about. Many people are digging in their own gardens, or they'll help out their less able neighbours. They'll bring all their finds to the incident room. We'll analyse and date them, and when we've identified the oldest, we'll decide where to put trenches in tomorrow. We've divided the village into 5 sections, each one with its own archaeologist, to make sure that things are done properly. Across the village, test pits are opening all over the place, and everyone's doing their part.
When you dig a trench, if it's a metre at the top, it must be a metre at the bottom. In other words, the sides of the trench must always be absolutely vertical. This means that the layer that you've got exposed actually on the bottom of the trench, you can actually see it in section. So don't just dig in the middle of the hole, dig right up to the edges, keep them straight. There's Phil's gospel lesson for the day.
By mid-morning, we're well on our way to exploring this side of the village where the main street and houses are. But over here to the east lies the church. It was built in Norman times, so it's possible there was something else there at that time.
The church is usually a central feature of the community, so if we're going to understand how people have lived here, we need to look at the church.
Is that one Norman?
I think Norman in its present form, but there must be earlier and later stuff as well.
Do you know much about the actual history of this site, Sarah?
Well, the church is dedicated to St Everilda, who's a very unusual dedication. There are only 2 churches dedicated to her in Yorkshire. She was a 7th century saint. We think that Bishop Wilfrid, who was Bishop of York, encouraged her to settle in Yorkshire with 2 other nuns in the 670s, and around them a community, it said, of up to 80 nuns soon formed.
Back in the village, people are beginning to get the hang of things.
Nope, nothing in that one.
And some finds are coming up.
You see a tad, a bit of green glaze over there.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost as old as I am.
Another stone unturned.
I think you've got a Roman brick.
You've got a good imagination.
Very vivid, yes. Very vivid.
The early signs, at least in this trench, look good.
That's what I'd call proper medieval. You're like 13th, 14th century. Jug sherds, it's local stuff probably made somewhere around York. These haven't travelled far at all, so, I mean, I think you could well be on top of some medieval archaeology here.
But you never believe, would you, that...
No, I'd have never believed this was here at all.
I see you've got a pipe there, Phil. Anything else?
Yeah, you see here, Tony, got a little child burial.
Oh.
Just one of those things, really. I mean, you know it's a burial ground.
What are you going to do with it?
We're going to give it the due respect it deserves and just leave it alone. Funnily enough, it doesn't actually detract from the objectives of of the trench here.
Which is?
Well, you see, if I get my shovel, see if I slot it in there.
Yeah.
Now, that is the base of the foundations. So the whole church is sitting on big stones like this. The main thing is that there is nothing, no walls coming this way. So in fact, we know that there was it doesn't look as though there are any aisles or transepts coming this way off of that wall.
Because we thought there might. You see that curve there, Tony?
Yeah.
Looks as if there's a an opening in there, and we thought that something might come off here. Well,
So you think it
doesn't.
might just be a door?
I think it might be more like a sort of tomb set in the wall,
Oh, I
or an
see.
Easter sepulchre or something. Clearly it's not a structure coming out this way, so it's answered that.
So now you've answered that, do you have to continue with this trench, or can you...
No, because we know that it was not wider. What we've now got to prove is whether or not it was longer.
So that's this
So
way.
that's when you wrap it around here?
Wrap it around the corner.
Across the village, even more test pits are opening up. There are now 32 of them. 3 o'clock day one, and this whole area is checkered with test pits. There's one down there by that yellow bucket, then 2 gardens along, there's one over there, then another 3 gardens along by that guy in the red hat, there's one, and then way at the end of that same garden by that blue tarpaulin is another one. Well, this worked. Now Paul and Carenza are complaining they've got too much to do.
You could just put them down there somewhere.
9 a.m. and there's frantic activity in the incident room. Outside, the locals are gathering to find out what we can tell from the test pits yesterday. Inside, we're still trying to work it out.
We've got no Saxon pottery at all from this end of the village, and it's not until we start heading west through the village that we get a few fragments of Saxon pottery, tiny triangle here showing just a few grams of pottery, tiny little amount there, a bit more here as we head west, and then even further west in this completely different bit of the village, what looks like a different history.
Well, I think we've got to build on what we did yesterday, take this test pitting strategy and apply it to this area. We've got to look at around the old stables, the granary, you know, the space at the back of the incident room. Let's get some trenches in there, you know, get some more local people involved in digging those, take it forward.
So up by the church, we open a test pit here. And here. And another here. And John does some more geophysics in and around the church to see if we can find other targets. Mick's getting more and more excited. It's not just Saxon he wants, he thinks that there was a monastery here. That would mean a settlement 400 years earlier than the present church. Could he be right? Mick, you've closed down this trench.
Yeah, well, it's told us all we needed to know, which is that the church doesn't go on further east.
But that means we've still got this 400-year-old gap between the time the nun died here and the time they put up this church in memory of her.
Yes, but I think looking at it as a gap's probably wrong. I mean, we're pretty sure of what would have happened during that period.
Well, what do you think happened?
Well, what tends to happen is when you get somebody who's turned into a saint, you often have a monastic community with it. And that is unlikely to have survived more than a couple of hundred years because the Scandinavians coming through here.
Well, the old Vikings.
Yeah, the Vikings, and they burn everything down, they destroy everything. If there's ever a nunnery here, it just evaporates.
Stuart's survey of the earthworks around the church has thrown up some interesting results. Here's the church. There's a medieval moated site just here. But there's also a whole other system of earthworks. This seems to be a roadway from the river heading straight towards the church. There also seems to be a large platform at the top of it, and off to the side is a large lump in the ground, another platform. It looks like it could be a boundary ditch of some sort, so we put a trench just here to see if it is.
What's nice here is we can see 2 distinct phases of archaeology. We've got the later wall, which looks to be 18th century handmade bricks running down the garden, and they're overlying straight on top of this earlier cobbled surface, which contains 15th century and therefore probably dates to that point too.
It's marvellous to see this.
I've laid some of the finds from the test pits out, sort of in chronological order, give you an idea what's going on. We've got the Romans down there all on their own, then a great big gap here.
This is the black hole of 400 years.
Yeah, this is the early and middle Saxon. say 450 to 850 AD. There's nothing so far. And then we arrive at the late Saxon. Now, when we're saying late Saxon, I suppose what we really mean is Viking age, 850 through into the 10th century. Then we've got this stuff, which is all the Norman period stuff, 11th to 12th century.
So those people who were saying that this is a medieval settlement, we've proved that that's wrong. We've got a lot of Norman stuff.
Yeah, we've got Norman and we've got pre-Norman, so I think from the pottery we've got here, there's very little doubt that there was a settlement here in the Norman times.
The pottery we found proves that there were people living in and around Nether Poppleton right through the medieval period and right back to the 11th century. That part of the village occupied by houses was laid out in the medieval period, but there was already a Norman community living here. So we closed down all the test pits in the village. They've answered that question. Out in Phil's trench, he's now reached the bottom of this feature. The Saxon pottery he found came from the other side of the trench. But what does this side tell us?
So what do you reckon? What have we got out of this now?
Well, not quite what we expected, Mick.
Right.
You remember on the geophysics, there was that white line, which
Very
we
clear,
thought was going to be a beam slot, a building, that sort of thing. Well, there's no way that this is a building. This is a massive ditch. It's going to come out, what, at least that size.
Well, I was going to say, because you've only got one half, haven't you? The other half going to be over here somewhere.
And have you got any dating for that ditch?
Yep, we've had pottery from about the Norman conquest right through to about the 14th century. It's within those sort of 300 or 400 years.
Yeah.
And I think that what we're looking at is activity here in the early medieval period at the same period as that church starts to be built.
So what do you think we have got here?
I think it's probably something to do with, well, the Norman period, you know. The church is all of that sort of date and later. We'd expect some sort of manor house to go with it, probably somewhere in this area, if not down on the moated mound. And this is one of the land divisions associated with that.
The main thing is, I think, that we've actually got people living round here, which of course you don't have now.
Up on the top of the hill here.
You look at it now, there's just one house here.
Yeah.
There's no village at all.
Yeah.
In those days, this would have been thriving.
But what of Mick's missing monastery here at the east end of the village around the church? Do we have any evidence for that? Well, we do.
Why they've used it as fish ponds is because it's an old river channel coming through there.
The Saxon ditch we found is most likely, in this instance, to have been from a monastic settlement. The church seems to have been built on the site of a former church or monastery. Its dedication to a saint who died 400 years earlier is an important clue. And the topography on a promontory is similar to that of many other monastic sites.
The mill wheel on the first floor, privy shape, really.
So now we just have to explain all of this to the people of Poppleton. What can we tell them after 3 days of exploring? Mick, can I borrow you a minute?
Yeah.
So we've got Anglo-Saxon here, Anglo-Saxon here.
Yeah, we must have some sort of hamlet here.
Well, to begin with, they were right. Their village is older than it looks. This pottery shows us that there was occupation here in Norman times and in Saxon times. In the Saxon period, there was an enormous enclosure surrounding a monastic settlement. It would have had a church as the centrepiece, houses, and a few workshops. The promontory it's situated on is perfect. Easy access to York and a bit of height to give it some security. In Norman times, the present church was built and a settlement grew up around it. The good news is that because of what we've discovered, you're going to be really busy for years to come. Thanks for having us.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Welcome to a ditch in Cambridgeshire. But this isn't any old ditch. Right here, 2 metres below the surface, is a layer of Roman finds. In fact, this is a pretty bountiful ditch. because over the years it's produced hundreds of examples of high-quality Roman pottery like this lot, including this beautiful find, a perfectly preserved Roman flagon, which is all very intriguing, but we really knew we had to come and investigate this site when this was discovered. A Roman cheese press. Why all the excitement? Because this is Stilton, the place that gave its name to the world-famous blue cheese. Mind you, that was invented about 200 years ago. What was happening here 2,000 years ago? How long has cheese had a role in Stilton's history? We've got just 3 days to find out. Stilton sits just off the A1 near Peterborough, and it's close to the Nene Valley, a major centre of the Roman pottery industry for 250 years. So it's no surprise that the fields around this town have been producing bits of Roman pots, bowls and vases for years.
3, look at that. 4, there's just pieces. Oh, there's another one there.
There's a bit there, look.
Oh gosh, yes. It hasn't come very far. It's not very braided, is it?
But it's the sheer amount and quality of the finds coming out of these ditches that have really caught the team's imagination. So we're not wasting any time, as we're going to have to open a very big, very deep trench before we reach any archaeology. But if the previous finds are anything to go by, it'll be worth the effort. We were just about to do a scene about this coin that Philip has just found when there was a yell from over here. So let's have a look at this one too. Finds really are starting to come up, aren't they, Helen?
Well, I suppose it's when you look very hard, you're going to find things on these interesting bumps of land.
What's this one?
It's a Celtic silver unit. Oh, goodness me. Oh, fantastic.
This Celtic or native British coin dates to the 1st century BC, suggesting there was trade, or at least activity, going on here at least 100 years before the Romans arrived. And what's the coin that we were going to do a scene about?
Well, it's silver, and it's actually a penny, but for some reason we call them shatters or skeets these days. And it's one of the most common kinds of Series E, dates to the early 8th century, and they're found all over eastern England and Holland as well.
Fabulous finds for so early in the dig. But do they actually tell us anything?
Well, it tells us that activity stretches back a few hundred years before the Romans were here making pottery, and a few hundred years afterwards as well.
So it looks like we'll have more than just the Roman archaeology to deal with here.
I think the signal is so strong here that there was undoubtedly a kiln at this point.
So could it be possible that the kiln has totally gone and what we're looking at is the clay underneath that has been heavily burnt?
It's possible, yeah. Be disappointing.
But the real shock is in Trench 2, where we've just discovered the last thing you'd expect on an industrial site.
Well, we definitely seem to have got the shin bone here, but then look, a very nice set of metatarsals, which our footballers are very fond of breaking. What we seem to be missing in the middle is the whole of the ribs and the vertebrae, which we definitely need. Because from the teeth wear, we might be able to say something about the age of the adult, and from the shape of the skull, we might be able to say something about its sex.
Yeah. In fact, we seem to have 2 burials, as Matt's just uncovered some more bones at the other end of Trench 2. This site just gets curiouser and curiouser, and we now have 2 very different investigations on this small hill. So as the delicate unpicking of the burials gets underway, the more physical industrial dig continues, with Phil and John opening a 3rd trench over another anomaly that John's also convinced is a kiln.
Look at this burnt clay that's coming around there, and it comes around there, back along there. It's just completely, well, I want to say it's nearly circular.
It's unusual, isn't it?
Well, it is.
Over on the other side, they're still digging through metres of dark, thick clay. But over here, just inches below the surface, we've already got a really good archaeological story, haven't we, Matt?
Yep, you can see we've got the second body here. Head to the west there, feet to the east. It's very delicate, very thin bone, so I'm thinking it's probably quite a young child or something like that. We don't know the date of it yet, but it looks to me like it's cutting through these layers with all the pottery and bits of broken up kiln in it, so definitely post-Roman, post-kiln.
So would your best guess be Anglo-Saxon?
Could be, yeah.
And the first body is over here. You've got the skull.
Yeah, it's a bit of a jumbled mess because we've had a bit of plough activity in this region. But, you know, we've got the lower jaw and look at its teeth, it's fantastic.
Kerry! Come over here, mate. So what are you seeing on that level?
What we've got is a much earlier Roman surface, at least 1.5, 2 metres below. And it's absolutely stuffed full of pottery.
Wow.
And that's from one sweep of the bucket.
And that hasn't been broken by the bucket?
No, that's old breaks. You can see the dirt on the sides there.
Francis, can you see it's got all this shelly stuff in it?
Yeah, it used to add shell. It made the pottery dry better when they were making it.
So what's your strategy going to be now?
What I'm going to do is finish this and get up to the section there, then we'll clean it up and then we'll dig down into it.
It's quite gracile, isn't it? It's not robust. And this part of the mandible, it's not, you know, really chunky.
We've got no big kind of muscle attachments,
No.
have we? So if anything, that's looking
more like a lady.
But as we start to remove the skeletons from Trench 2, it becomes apparent that we haven't just got 2 burials, but the remains of up to 7 different individuals, including children and babies.
I just wanted to show you this. So I heard you talking about the teeth. There, can you see
Oh, wow.
the molar popping through? And so obviously it was a young child. I was wondering kind of how old that would be, at what age that?
Yes, look at that. You look at that tooth there, it's very small, so you could almost say that is in its milk teeth still.
I think that makes this as a pretty young...
About 7?
About 7, yes.
It's now clear that this was a significant Saxon site. The task for us is to try and work out what was happening here 300 years after the Romans left.
I do think we have finally got the full extent of it.
I reckon you're right.
Thankfully, the Roman element of this complex field is beginning to make more sense. In Trench 3, Phil now has something that's beginning to look remarkably kiln-like. And now that the burials have been removed, we can also confirm that Trench 2 contains a kiln, although it seems to be of a different construction to the one in Phil's trench.
I think what you've got actually, Helen, is a stone-lined cut. In other words, it could be the actual chamber of a kiln.
Oh.
And this is like the stone lining for the cut. That's the kiln interior, and then you would have had the fire bricks or clay lining the inner face of that wall, forming the actual furnace chamber for the kiln.
It's now almost the end of day 2, and it feels like we've got more to investigate than ever. And that doesn't even include the masses of newly uncovered archaeology in the ditch trench.
Oh, crikey, look at that lot.
You can see the amount of pot we've got crammed into the centre there.
The other thing about it, not only is a lot of pot, but you can see the dark colour of the soil. There's a lot of charcoal in there, and of course there's waterlogged wood in there. Not a lot, but it's there.
I think that's quite incredible. I mean, it must mean there's a whole lot of stuff under this field, mustn't it? Extraordinary.
And this is the trench that everyone's getting really excited about. Yesterday they were speculating that in it is a Neolithic causewayed enclosure, which is very, very rare. Francis has only ever discovered one in his life. Francis, now you've had a look at it, is this the second?
Well, I'm very excited, Tony. First thing this morning, we found this superb Neolithic flint. It's beautifully sharp, and, you know, I'm very excited about it. Well, I was for about 10 minutes. And then we found this. And this is a piece of Anglo-Saxon pottery.
That's just as exciting.
Hang on, what are you saying? Are you saying it is a Neolithic ditch that's been reused in Anglo-Saxon times, or are you saying it's not Neolithic at all?
I'm saying, if it was Neolithic and reused, I'd expect a great deal more flint than this. I'm afraid I think it's Anglo-Saxon, end of story.
So why is that exciting?
Well, because they don't turn up very often, and to actually have the ditch, we have post holes, we have burials, it all starts to look like an Anglo-Saxon settlement. That's tremendously exciting.
This is Time Team. We find something, we think it's very exciting. It turns out to be something else. It's even more exciting.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's it.
It's all right. Oh, look, we've got some pots in there.
Definitely pots hiding in there, yes.
Other parts of our investigation here have been more straightforward. Thanks to some experimental archaeology, we've now established that the local clays around Stilton were perfect for the Roman pottery industry.
So how do you feel that went as a firing then, Rick?
Well, as a piece of experimental archaeology, I think it's been very successful.
Yeah.
Back on the hill, more evidence from the Anglo-Saxon periods emerging.
Brace yourself for treasure. Ta-da!
even I, as a Romanist, would recognise that as
Yep.
a significant object.
Absolutely. It may not be
Saxon
beautiful.
pinhead.
Yep, Middle Anglo-Saxon, 8th, 9th century. So
Yeah.
it fits in brilliantly with the shatter
Doesn't it?
and with the pottery that seems to be coming out
Yeah.
of the ditch, which is really tremendous. It's really
That's
exciting.
superb.
I mean, I know it's building castles in the air, but an Anglo-Saxon ditch, a Middle Anglo-Saxon ditch round an island,
Yeah.
it's beginning to look like, oh, could be a monastery.
There are now all sorts of theories running around the site that we may have discovered a significant centre of Anglo-Saxon religion.
Oh my goodness, what's that? What is that?
It's another wall, and it's butting against the wall of the kiln. Somebody's built a wall into the kiln.
My goodness.
Hermits were effectively the first monks, and if this is a Middle Saxon hermitage, we've found something incredibly rare, because most hermitages now lie under some of Britain's most impressive abbeys and cathedrals.
We know that the way the early church was organised, that's what people did. They went and lived miles from anybody else, on retreat, we'd call it today, wouldn't we? Sort of, you know, in isolation. No, it is speculation, but it fits the archaeological evidence for that period. So, you know, I'm reasonably confident that's what we've got.
If it is a hermitage, how important a site does it make it?
Well, every so often we do a programme, and I think what we find, that'll go into the textbooks, because it's a good example of this or a better example of that. And I think this is one of those, you know. You've got an enclosure from the geophysics, you've got Saxon pottery, you've got burials, you've got post-hole buildings. That's the sort of thing that's going to get mentioned in any discussion about this period or this topic. So I think it's one of those.
In so many other places, this would have evolved into one of the great Saxon and medieval abbeys and monasteries of Britain. For some unknown reason, that didn't happen here, and as a result, we've uncovered the rarest of archaeological finds, a hermitage. And this site still offers more. As the end of the day approaches, it turns out that the Saxons and Romans weren't the first people to recognise the importance of this small Cambridgeshire hill. Been a good day for you, hasn't it? You've got your kiln and you've got an Anglo-Saxon enclosure.
Look what I've got for you. Another enclosure.
Oh my God, look at
Where,
that.
where?
Look, once you focus in on it, you can see it. If I turn it that way, it's like a pair of spectacles.
But this is a double one on this side, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's your prehistoric one.
So we're suddenly back into the Neolithic again.
It could be.
We found more here at Stilton than we could ever have hoped for.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
This unprepossessing mound on the Isle of Sheppey may not look much, but underneath here are the remains of the last great royal palace of the medieval period. Queensborough Castle was built by King Edward III for his beloved Queen Philippa, and by all accounts it was a very impressive and important building, although strangely very few images of it remain, and those that there are seem to contradict each other. Some give it round outer walls, for instance, others give it square ones. The castle was built at Queensborough on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent in 1361. It's located at the end of the creek running from the River Swale. Queensborough itself was the last royal new town of the Middle Ages and was built by Edward at the same time as his castle. Oliver, we've got all these conflicting reports of what the castle looked like. Which one do you favour?
Well, we've got a couple. We've got this interesting elevation, which is by Wenceslas Holler, 1640s.
I think we can rely on him. He's a good artist, isn't he?
I think so. It looks pretty believable to me. But I think really interestingly, we have this plan. A couple of hundred years after the castle was built. Around here we seem to have a perfectly circular moat. Just inside that, a circular curtain wall. Within that, another range of masonry structures, very much like a rotunda. Over here, I think we can just about pick out a gatehouse, and on the other side, an inner gatehouse.
But the problem is we don't actually know what the scale of that is, or indeed what the orientation of it is.
I love this little round thing in the middle. What's that?
Seems to be the castle well, as far as we can guess. If you look behind us,
yeah,
we think it's over here.
Cool.
This is it. That's whitey yellow.
Let's have a look, Phil. But I think that's probably a tile. Might be medieval tile, of course.
I think so.
You can see there's sort of clay inclusions in it and the edge of it.
Trench 2 should give us the scale of the castle by stretching from the rotunda to the curtain wall and the moat beyond.
Oh, look at that. I mean, that is a killer arch, isn't it?
Back in Trench 1, Phil's working on the rotunda wall that he found earlier.
We got stone down here that might just be in situ. I think we've actually got part of the wall.
That's just not one random stone down there.
No. Listen to me. Look, there's one stone comes along there, and then there's this whacking great piece here. There's another stone there. Bridge, I reckon we got King Edward's castle.
If our plan's accurate, the castle's full of curving bits, so Phil's could be any of these three shapes. The angle of it suggests one of the towers, but that would make this an outside wall, which would surely mean the rotunda was too small to fit all the rooms in. The 2D plan of the castle is difficult to visualise, and as a 3D architectural model, it's beginning to look pretty peculiar.
Now when it gets to there, it turns back on itself. So it looks like the actual front of the wall is built as a sort of series of lobes.
Yeah.
But what we're really getting excited about, look, we've got the back edge.
And it's about 2 metres wide, isn't it?
Absolutely cracking,
It's a zonking great wall, isn't it?
I know, I never thought we were going to get that.
You see those two concrete blocks?
So they're modern, aren't they?
They're modern, but they might actually mark the site of this sort of edge coming round.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, of course, should be the moat of the castle.
Around about here?
Yeah.
The moat seems to be full of masonry, which looks like it's part of Edward III's castle. But we won't know which bit until we've pulled it all out.
Let's hold on for a couple of seconds here. I'm just going to have a quick look down here. That's going back onto this stony rubble.
But it might not be as solid a wall if it's just marking a roadway or...
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Phil's extended Trench 1 by 13 metres in his bid to find the outer rotunda wall.
Phil?
Yo!
How are you getting on?
Well, I've lost my castle, mate.
You've lost the castle? That's very careless of you. What's going on?
Oh, no. Well, you see, we're supposed to have, along this side here somewhere, the front of the rotunda. Now, if you look behind you, look, there's that road iron.
Ah, right, yes.
It ought to come through here somewhere. And all we got is clay.
I mean, is this natural that you've got here, this clay?
Well, it looks it, but it's got chalk in it.
Oh, yeah.
Shouldn't have chalk in the clay.
No, so it's contaminated with something. It's
That's
dumped
right.
then.
Yeah.
Phil's going to need to find the elusive outer wall if we're going to work out how big the castle rotunda is. By tea time on day 2, Yorkshire has uncovered a good chunk of the curtain wall which surrounded the entire castle.
This is basically the extent of it here.
Yeah.
We still have some of the stones packed in the bottom, but the rest of it, it's just gone.
This doesn't look as big as I expected, Oliver, on that History of the King's Works plan. It looks absolutely massive.
It looks to me as if the front portion of the wall has actually gone, so the wall would have been a lot wider, but it's still a pretty decent medieval wall.
It may only be half its original size, but at least we now know where the curtain wall is. Though we still need both walls of the rotunda to work out the scale of the castle. Everyone has been saying for the last couple of days how unique this castle is, but I don't really get a sense of what that uniqueness is.
Now, most royal castles are multi-phase buildings. They're rebuilt over many generations. Their plans are added to. Queensborough, on the other hand, it seems to be a single-phase castle. It's planned in one fell swoop. So Edward III seems to be employing his masons to impose what's almost an ideal castle onto the landscape.
Is it a rather bizarre one-off, or did it actually influence British architecture?
And we've got an interesting plan in front of us here. This is Deal Castle, which is down in Kent. It's a couple of hundred years later. It's a castle built by Henry VIII. If you put the two plans next to each other, you can see there are a couple of features that they have broadly in common. It's basically this idea that they have very symmetrical designs. There's a line of symmetry. Here at Queensborough, it's down the middle. likewise a deal. And also the fact that they repeat circular form. So this is 200 years later, but there's a level of similarity there.
Meanwhile, Matt's found some foundations where he was expecting to find the other corridor wall. But they look very different from the wall he found yesterday. The two corridors are crucial to understanding the use of the castle. They would have forced any visitors or marauders to take a circuitous route around the outer walls of the rotunda, either exposed to fire or forced to admire the full grandeur of the castle before entering the inner sanctum.
What Phil's got there is a piece of curving wall below the ladder there, and then another curving wall coming off it underneath the bucket and the spade, right?
Mm.
If you look at that on the plan, the only thing that fits with that is the junction of one of these walls with the main wall of the castle. But
Well, that looks all right.
Yeah, but if you put that over the top of that, then none of the rest of it makes sense that we've dug up. You can't get it all to square up at all.
So presumably that either means we're misinterpreting the archaeology or the plan's wrong.
I'm not sure we're misinterpreting the archaeology because we've looked down this trench for any other sign of any other wall to go with that, and it isn't there.
And you've got another conundrum here as well, because if that interpretation is right, and that's the curve of that, and the well is in the right position, and that's the corner of the wall there and the well there, that distance is only 12 metres, so you've got to fit all that tower, all these rooms, gatehouse, courtyard and well into 12 metres.
It won't work, you see.
It's like a sandcastle skyscraper.
Yeah, it's of tiny people. The problem is this damn thing. We've been using this for 2 or 3 days now and relying on it, and there's clearly something wrong with it.
So throughout the whole 2.5 days, this has been our one piece of certainty and sanity, and now it looks like this is completely wrong.
It should be about 4 metres wide, curving through on this line.
If the only thing we can rely on is the archaeology,
I'm confident that it's curving. Whether it's castle or not is up to you.
Okay.
we have to keep digging. So Trench 5 is located over another part of the rotunda, which might help us work out whether the plan is the wrong size or the wrong shape.
Looks like a wall.
Smug now, are you?
Further round the rotunda, Bridge has been looking for the grandest part of the castle.
You can see behind me, you've got loads of white material here. Basically, it's made up of mortar and it's made up of stone, just rammed together. Now, we've got 3 options of what that could be. Either it's intact medieval archaeology.
Bit of castle.
Associated with the castle. Number 2 could be demolition associated with the castle, dating to about 1650.
So where people have taken the good stone out and then chucked back all the rubbish and offcuts and mortar.
Yeah, and then use the stone somewhere else.
Okay.
Or number 3, it could be associated with the construction of the initial pump house that was on the top of the mound here.
That's Victorian.
That would be Victorian.
So you've got 600 years to play with.
Yeah, and the only defining feature in this trench is this cut that runs all the way down here. We've got what looks like natural on this side, and then we've got the white material on that side.
Bridge is hoping that Jonathan will be able to date the mortar to either the construction or demolition of the castle.
I mean, both are contenders. Either 1650s trash or it's medieval, you know, cheapo wall-filling rubbish. The medieval builders had a kind of cornflake box approach to having 2 good, firm outer walls, and you stuff the middle with ill-fitting rubbish that all settles.
During the building of the castle.
Yeah.
I'll start at this end of the trench. You can see we've dug down a little. We've got this huge cut coming straight in down there. If you follow it back, it comes up again in a straight line there and across here.
Right.
I thought this was a wall, but I'm not so convinced now because on the other side of it, actually coming in here, we've got another big cut that comes in, across there and down there. And my current theory is this. This is no longer the wall, this is the path in between, straight up to the middle of the mound.
Right.
So you had a wall coming across this way and a wall coming across this way. Both the walls, though, have been robbed away.
The direction and size of this corridor means that we can now say with confidence that the castle faced the west, looking down the high street. And we're hoping that Raksha's wall will help us with the rotunda.
Well, if you look here, there's a nice line curving there, and there's another one curving that way, so it's all going around that way.
So we can say this is the castle. It's the only big circular structure.
The wall curves towards Phil's trench, but sadly doesn't help us identify whether it's the inner or outer wall. So, with just an hour to go, Phil decides to expand Trench 1 towards a geophysical anomaly which could just be the outside of the rotunda.
That compacted surface and all the stonework is what we're seeing in the resistance. That's, to me, not the outer wall.
No, I quite agree with you, John, but what I'm saying is, let's nail this. Come on in, let's get on with it.
My money's on that's the outside.
I don't care, you're probably right. I think you probably are right. See, now we're... Yeah.
Into the curve.
There is an edge, there is an edge, there is an edge in the... What is it there?
The question is, the edge of what? With all the confusion, Ray Sand's hard work on the model has been a waste of time. So he's begun to work on a computer-generated version of Queen Philippa's castle.
Yeah, it brings out really nicely the way the castle, well, it's like a great wedding cake, doesn't it? We know it's packed with literally scores and scores, 50 or more separate rooms. We know there's a hall, various chambers, a kitchen, guard rooms, stores, absolutely packed with rooms.
Yes, let's not forget we're talking about a major citadel palace. Details such as 407 doors and windows towards its closing stages. Some of these must have been of the highest quality. It is, after all, no accident that it perhaps does look like a beautiful chateau with those beautiful pointed turrets, because she was, after all, very much a French noblewoman and must have felt, therefore, very much at home here.
Having located what could be the remains of the missing outer wall, Phil's augering the middle of his trench for signs of the interior of the rotunda.
Good Lord alive. I mean, that is a big hole that's been open for a long time, it's filled up with water.
The question is, why is there a big hole where there should be a big structure? Of all the trenches that we've dug over the last 3 days, this is the one that's given us the most problems.
Well, yeah.
And we still don't know what's in it, do we?
Well, I hate to be contradictory, but I think we do, actually. I think what we might have is a very large robber trench going all the way around the top, robbing out the outer line of the rotunda.
What makes you think that?
Well, on the mapping, we've had this feature, which is a wide ditch round the top of the hill, which will come through here at 12 metres wide in places. And I think that's what we can see here in the cut and over the far side in the cut. And what we've got is a huge, great robber trench digging all that out. And we actually have a bigger castle than what you've been thinking.
Yeah, but Phil's trench, Stuart, shows a circular feature, doesn't it? With a wall coming up to it. Now, these are the only circular features on the plan.
That's the only thing that makes sense with that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And the width of this makes it 24 metres, you know, to centre it on the well. Well, Henry VIII fixed up this castle in 1536 and then built Pendennis and St Maur's and around the coast Deal and Walmer, and they're between 20 and 30 metres. This is 24. So why shouldn't this have been a model for Henry, where that, Phil's trench, is the outer wall?
I'm just going with the archaeology as I see it.
If you go with the archaeology, you have to end up with...
And the argument continues on right until the last moment, when almost 3 metres below the surface...
God, that looks like mortar. That is mortar.
Phil finds a final clue.
Well, maybe there is a structure here after all.
Stuart was right. The hole in Phil's trench was a massive robber trench from the demolition of the castle. But traces of the cellars under the rotunda were picked up by the augering. Phil's inner wall was the junction of the inner wall with the gatehouse, and 40 rooms would easily have fitted inside the massive structure of the rotunda. At last, we're able to visualise how this unique and beautiful building would have looked to King Edward and Queen Philippa as they admired their new castle in the 1360s.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.